letter. This is from Toussaint, because it says in the first part, it says, 3 white women of the ancient regime lived abroad, wrote to him asking for the restoration of their properties. Toussaint replied, showing some of the secret of his success with all classes of people. I have received the letters with which you have been so kind as to honor me. I have always done so much. I have always done as much as lies in my power to preserve the property of each and every one.
What?
Yours, citizen.
I can't find you.
I went back a little bit. 253.
How far?
The beginning of the page.
Okay, so we're starting a whole new page instead of a paragraph.
It was because it's not a whole new page. It's okay. It's not a big deal. I received letters with which you have been so kind as to honor me. I have always done as much as lies in my power to preserve the property of each and every one. Yours, citizens, has not suffered from the unhappy events inevitable in a revolution. It is intact. The power to remove the sequestration under which it lies does not rest with me. That is in the hands of the agent of the directory. I can only assure you that his decision will be punctually executed. For more than 3 years, citizens, I have asked the citizens of Dajux, your mother, to come back to her property. My advice, unhappily for her and for you, has not prevailed over that of her brother. There was still time to profit by the proclamation carrying the name and authorization of the French government. Your mother has, however, preferred to follow the fate of her brother, Coquerel, rather than remain in Saint Mark, to profit by the advantages of the amnesty and retake possession of her property. She has left with her brother. It no longer depends on me to get her to come back home. In regard to the husband of the citizens, Fontaine, I can no longer prevent him from being written down as an emery. That would be to place myself above the law. And that has never entered my mind nor my principles. When the agents decided to raise your sequestration, I shall neglect commend to me in a position to look after your interests in the most advantageous manner. If my advice can be of any use to him, I should give it to him if he wishes it, with the greatest pleasure, being happy to seize the opportunity to witness the infinite value which I attach to your goodwill on every occasion that it is in harmony with my duties. Accept, citizens, the assurance of my respect and regards. I sincerely wish the happiness of all of you, and the return of your mother to your arms. Perhaps it is his correspondence that we can mostly easily grasp the range of sensitivity of Toussaint's untaught genius. In his letter to the commissioners in 1791, his correspondence with Lavax was overtures to Dieudonné. His letter to the Directory in 1796, his speech at Port Republicana, after the expulsion of the English, his letter to Hondeville, and his resignation in all of these, as here in his gracious but careful letter, his vision of precisely what is required is unerring. His taste in faultless, and the constantly varying approach is always suffused with revolutionary passion, a large humanity, and a never-failing personal distinction. These letters, more than anything else, show that whatever the task that faced him, he did it to the manner born. The community where so many were still primitive and simple-minded. The personal character and conduct of the leader, sprung from the people, was not without social significance. Despite Toussaint's despotism, his ruthlessness, his interpenetrability, his unsleeping suspicion of all around him, his skill in large-scale diplomacy and petty intrigue, to the end of his life he remained a man of simply and kindly free feelings. His humanity never drowned by the rivers of blood which flowed so plentifully and so long. His, quote, no reprisal sprang from the genuine honor of useless bloodshed. Women and children, in particular, he hated to see suffer, while his army starved in the campaign against the British. He gave food to the destituted white women of the district. After the Civil War, he paid the same careful attention to biracial women and children. He was incapable of meanness, pettiness, or vindictiveness of any kind. Basui was his old enemy and rival, had been murdered and left a widow in Spanish Santo Toussaint gave her a pension, and when he went to Santo Domingo, he saw that she returned to her home with honors and dignities. To the widow of Chanvanes, the biracial person who had perished with OGE, he gave a pension of 6,000 francs a year. Often, where a modern dictator would shoot, he preferred to deport. He had the curious detachment and inward scorn of men which distinguished Bonaparte, who forgave his family over and over again when they deceived him, and without any personal bitterness watched Murat, Talleyrand, and Fonchi intriguing and plotting against him. Toussaint could strike without mercy. Oh my gosh, I gotta do a freaking thingy. Hold on. Come on. Without mercy at men like Ragout, who unparalleled his plans, who imperiled. Is that right? What?
Imperiled.
Imperiled his plans. But when one day a white officer who had deserted to the English was captured and brought back, he merely smiled at him and said, quote, I see that you are two good friends, or you are two good friends for fortune to keep us apart any longer, and did no more. He was fortunate in his family, and they helped to give him prestige. His brother Paul was a distinguished officer. Mosey and Belair, his nephew, were famous for their bravery. His nephew Chancey was his aide-de-camp. No one could say that any of them owed his position to anything but conspicuous ability. His wife lived on a plantation in the interior and devoted herself to the cultivation of coffee. Whenever Toussaint could escape from his duties, he went there. Visitors saw them sitting hand in hand, as in the old days when they were slaves together. Her sister married a French officer, old Pierre Baptistia, who lived to be over 100, would not accept any honors or riches, but lived simple in Le Cap. Whenever Toussaint went to the town, his first visit was always to the old man who had given him the rudiments of an education. He loved children, and they loved him. Riding one day from Gonaves to Inri, a little orphan named Rose, 10 years of age, ran after him, calling, "Papa, Papa, take me away with you," end quote. He dismounted, took her up, and carried her home to his wife. Here is an orphan who has just called her father. I accept the title, accept also the title of her mother. And Rose became a member of the Louverture household. This was the sort of thing that bound him to a simple agricultural people. He did not do it for propaganda. It came naturally to him, as did also his respect for older people, to whom he always gave away in the street. He loved music and always had flowers in his room. The basis of his power was the support of black laborers. Its framework was the army. But from the simplest black laborer to the French general, the best educated and most traveled and experienced of the local whites, all recognized that both in his work and personal idiosyncrasies, he was the first man in San Domingo, and such a man as would have been in the first rank in any sphere. He demanded that they gave unquestioned obedience. He had his advisors, but his proclamation, laws, and addresses, he have his own personal quality. In all accounts of him, and tradition agreed that he left nothing to anybody, working at everything himself, consulting friends and well-wishers, but involving his schemes in his own secretive manner, and then checking every small detail himself. After a time, he never questioned the future. Of unbound energy and will, he had a fatalism of men who know that their cause is equipped to meet whatever danger impedes. For himself, he expected the usual end of revolutionaries, an impudent Spaniard of Spanish San Domingo once pointedly referred to the fate of Columbus in the answer to the question. Toussaint did not deny the parallel. Quote, I know very well that Columbus suffered ingratitude from Spain, and that such is the destiny of men who serve their country well. They have powerful enemies. As for me, it is the fate which is reserved for me, and I know I shall perish, a victim of calumny. In this Roman stoicism, he was, despite his Catholicism, a typical representative of the French Revolution, with the exception always of Bonaparte. No single figure in the whole period of the French Revolution traveled so fast and so far. But Toussaint was no phenomenon, no black person, they said freak. The same forces which molded his genius had helped to create his black and biracial generals and officials. Age, his chief of staff, was a white man, but all the senior general, black or biracial people, chiefly black. They were two generals of division, one Dessalines and the other Clairvaux, a biracial person. Dessalines was the most famous of the black generals. By some, he was thought to excel Toussaint in military genius. Yet it was late in life before he learned to sign his name. His governor, the Department of the West, with a iron rod. And though having no constructive capacity for government, he had a shrewdness, cunning, and ruthless determination, which were to be of inestimable service to his people before long. He had no sympathy with Toussaint's policy of reconciliation with the whites, but dazzled by Toussaint's gift, he worshipped his chief and obeyed him implicitly. Late in the 1801, he married one of the most notable women in San Domingo, a black woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence, the former mistress of a planter who had given her a good education. She was very sympathetic towards the whites, and she and Toussaint kept Dessalines in check. Of the other 7 generals of brigade, Vernet was a biracial person, the last to be appointed. All the other were black people. Toussaint's favorite was his nephew, Charles Bellard. And it was It was believed that he disdained Bellard to his successor. In 1801, he was only 23 and had been aide-de-camp to Toussaint when he was only 18. He had fought with distinction against the British and in the Civil War against the South. Handsome, with distinguished manners, he loved military parades and display. He did not like whites. And Sanit, his wife, hated them and encouraged him to treat them harshly. Mosey was a different type of bonny lad, a dashing soldier, fond of women, the most popular soldier in the army, beloved by black people of the North for his arrogant championship of them against the whites. He stood high in Toussaint's favor until he refused to carry out Toussaint's severe labor legislation in the North. Cultivation in his district suffered, and Toussaint sent observers to watch his administration and listen to the criticism Mosey indiscreetly made to Toussaint's policies towards the whites. At first, it was thought he would be the successor, and the whites decided that if Mosey ever ruled, they would leave. In one way, the most remarkable of black generals was Marepes. He was the only one who had not been a slave and came from the old free family. He read widely, was a man of great culture, and knew the military art to the last point. He governed his district with justice and fairness to all. Christophe, ex-waiter, could neither read nor write. But he also astonished the French by his knowledge of the world and the ease and authority which he ruled. He was an English black person, but unlike Toussaint, he learned to speak French with remarkable fluency. He loved luxury, was friendly with the whites, and governed well. Lemplum, the same who had arrested Daudoni, was an old, incompetent, a poor soldier, but easygoing and beloved by all, costing millions, which could have been beautiful in Paris. When Marepes entertained General Ramel, the French could not believe his eyes at the manner, conversation, and patient ability. French generals, officials, and colonists who wrote reports and memoirs about these generals and other officials when at the height of their power, all noted the ease and quickness with which they had learned to command. Pamphile de Lacroix said that these old slaves, that they had learned more quickly than French workers or peasants in a similar position could have done. This was probably true, and it was because the black leaders were not too permitted by the ideas of the ruling class as a French worker or peasant would have been. Mass support had elevated them and maintained them in supreme power, and the responsibility gave them confidence. In one report drawn up by Hundeville's private use, the author noted the people of color of each officer and official in a long list. A good, bad, and indifferent soldiers and administrators are divided equally among the three people of color. But many of black people, illiterate, had to have white secretaries. Toussaint was sending black and biracial children to France at the public expense to be educated so that they might return and govern. All he wanted was time. But San Domingo was not destined to have peace. The white slave owners were a cause of discord at home, while the maritime bourgeoisie in France remembered always the fabulous profits of the slave trade. The whites had no other choice except Toussaint's regime. With the sensitiveness of property owners, they saw that as long as Toussaint was there, their lives were safe, and they talked and behaved as if they were devoted to him. When he came to Le Camp, After the campaign in the South, he took the leading part in the celebration. He was welcomed by a great triumphal arch. Verses composed in his honor were read by the white woman who great beauty, who placed on his head a crown of laurel. Old Toussaint, always gallant, embraced the charming disuse. There were also other embracing of a less public nature. The Creole ladies of San Domingo, members of some of the most distinguished families, who of the did regime, were carried away by his singular personality and his power. In less than a dozen years, they had managed to overcome the cast iron prejudices in which they had been reared. They fought among each other for his notice and sent him passionate letters, locks of hair, and keepsakes of all kinds. Toussaint was not averse, although with discretion. Open immortality had high places. He told his general had an evil effect on public morals. It was exactly the sort of thing Toussaint would say and think. And yet, despite all the intimacy between whites and the new black ruling class, Toussaint knew that unlike Sinofax, Lovax, Romy, and Vincent, all the revolutionaries of the first period, these old slave owners and their women did not like the laborers. Whatever the pretended devotion of the men and the liking the women might have for him as an individual. It was in 1798, and he wrote so courteously to the white women who asked for a return of their property, and all through that year, he and Hundeville quarreled about the policy to adopt towards the white emeries. Yet at the very period when the whites of Port-au-Prince were bowing and scraping before him, an incident took place which lets us see what Toussaint thought of the whites as whites. The white colonists wanted to post as storekeepers and asked Toussaint for it. Toussaint said no. The colonist's wife tried many times to approach Toussaint, but was unsuccessful. Sometime after, she gave birth to a son and asked Toussaint to be the godfather. Toussaint, usually so savvy and conciliatory, for some reason or other, decided to let this woman know his mind. Why, madam, do you wish me to be grand godfather of your son? Your approach to me has no other aim than to get me to give a post to your husband, for the feelings of your heart are contrary to the request that you make of me. How can you think so? All the whites are attached to you. Madam, I know the whites, and if I had their skin, yes, but I am black. I know their aversion to us. Have you reflected well on the request which you make of me? If I accept, how do you know that when he reaches the age of reason, your son may not reproach you for giving him a black person as a godfather? But general, madam, Toussaint interrupted her, pointed to the sky. He who governs all is alone immortal. I am general, it is true, but I am black. After my death, who knows if my brothers will not be driven back into slavery and will yet perish under the whip of the whites. The work of men is not durable. The French Revolution was enlightened Europeans. We are loved and wept over by them. But the white colonists are enemies of black people. You wish your husband to get a post. Well, I give him the employment that he demands. Let him be honest and let him remember that I cannot see everything, but that nothing escapes God. I cannot accept your offer to be godfather to your son. You may have to bear the reproaches of the colonists, and perhaps one day that of your son. These were his views. He never changed them, yet he set his face sternly against radical determination. He guarded his power and the rights of the laborers by an army overwhelmingly black. But within that wall, he encouraged all to come back, biracial people and whites. The policy was both wise and workable, and if his relations with France had been regularized, he would have done all he hoped to do. But San Domingo did not know where it stood in relation to France. There were still fears for liberty, and the black laborers did not approve of Toussaint's policy. They felt that he showed too much favor to their old enemies. These anti-white feelings of black people were not infringement of liberty or equality, but were in reality the soundest revolutionary policy. It was fear of the counter-revolution. They had loved Sinothax, called down blessings on his head, and made their children pray for him at night. 50 years afterwards, their old eyes would glow as they told travelers of this wonderful white man who had given them liberty and equality, not only in words but in deeds. But men like Sinothax, Vincent, Lavax, and Romy were few, and with the decline of the revolution in France had come a man like Hundeville. The black laborers had their eyes fixed on the local whites and resented Toussaint's policy. It was not the whites at home who Toussaint feared. It was the counter-revolution in France. But black people could see in the eyes of their former owners the regret of the old days and the hatred. Shortly after, Toussaint issued one of his stern proclamations confining black people to the plantations. Some of these whites issued a proclamation of their own to the laborers. Quote, "You say that you are free, yet you are going to be forced to come back to my house, and there I shall treat you as before, and shall show you are not free." End quote. This was the spirit which so constantly provoked massacres of whites. Toussaint, fined the culprits heavily, ordered that all who could not pay should be imprisoned, even women, reduce such officers as were concerned to the ranks. But he still continued to favor the whites. Every white woman was entitled to come to all circles, quote unquote. Only the wives of the highest black officials could come. A white woman was called madam. A black woman was a citizen. Losing sight of his mass support, taking it for granted, he sought only to consolate the whites at home and abroad. What about Bonaparte? What would Bonaparte do? Toussaint, pursuing his policy, made gestures of friendship to the all abroad. Madame de Bonaparte, Hornas's, Josephine's mother, had a plantation at Louvain. After the evacuation by the British, Josephine wrote Toussaint about the plantation, which was in ruin. A correspondence began. Toussaint repaired and restored the plantation at the expense of the colony, and sent the revenues to Madame Bonaparte. Josephine befriended his two boys, and they went often to luncheon and dinner at her house. But Toussaint wanted his sons back, and Bonaparte would not send them. Toussaint prepared for an inevitable war. That was one of the reasons which drove him to demand that his generals be mercilessly strict with the laborers. He bought 30,000 guns from America. He armed the laborers. At reviews, he would snatch a gun, wave it, and shout it. "Here is your liberty," quote unquote. He was not afraid to arm the masses. He trusted them, for he had no interest apart from theirs. He hid stocks of ammunition, supplies, in secret places in the interior. He called up an able-bodied for military training and drilled the regular army. Bold in innovation, he introduced a system of commands by whistles. In every conceivable way except one, he prepared. The black people would have to fight. This war would devastate San Domingo as no war had ever devastated it before, ruin his work, and let loose barbarism and savagery again, this time on the unprecedented scale. but any large expedition could have no other aim than the restoration of slavery. In that cruel dilemma, he worked feverishly, hoping against hope, writing to Bonaparte, begging for skilled workmen, teachers, administrators to help him govern the colony. Bonaparte would not answer, and Toussaint would guess why. If Bonaparte wrote a personal letter, he would have either to accept or condemn. If he accepted, then Toussaint's position would receive the final sanction. If he condemned, then Toussaint would openly declare independence and perhaps clinch a bargain with the British, if one were not made already. Toussaint, however, immediately after the victory in the South, had decided to regularize his own position and put an end to internal troubles for the future by giving San Domingo a constitution. For this purpose, he summoned an assembly of 6 men, one from each province, consisting of rich whites and biracial peoples. There was not one black person. As always, now he was thinking of the effect of France and not of the effect of his own masses, feeling too sure of them. This sounds like a big, huge critique real quick. The members of his assembly were merely figureheads. The Constitution of Toussaint l'Ouverture, from the first line to the last, and in it, he enshrined his principles of government. Slavery, thank you. Appreciate that. Slavery was forever abolished. Every man, whatever his color, was admissible to all employments, and there was to exist no other distinction than that of virtues and talent, and no other superiority than that which the law gives in the exercise of the public function. He incorporated in the Constitution an article which preserved their rights to all proprietors absent from the colony, quote, for whatever reason, end quote, except if they were on the list of emeries proscribed in France. For the rest, Toussaint concentrated on all powers in his own hands. Every municipal administration was composed of a mayor and 4 administrators. They were nominated by the governor for 2 years from a list of 16 submitted to him. The church was strictly subordinate to the state. The governor apportioned to each minister of religion the extent of his administration, and the clergy were not allowed under any pretext whatsoever to form an association in the colony. Laws were to be preceded by this formula, quote, the Central Assembly of San Domingo on the proposal of the governor, end quote. They were to be promulgated with the formula, quote, the governor commands, end quote. Every department of administration, finance, police, army was confided to him, and he corresponded directly with France on everything related to the colony. He had the censorship of all printed matters. The Central Assembly could accept, or reject laws, but the assembly was in the hands of the governor, being elected by the principal administrators, whom he had nominated. The Constitution appointed Toussaint governor for life, with power to name his successor. Constitutions are what they turn out to be. France in 1802 could have no quarrels with Toussaint over this constitution on the score of despotism. What would strike any Frenchman, however, was that the Constitution, though swearing allegiance to France, left no room for any French officials. Toussaint wanted them to come out and help govern, but under the local government. It was virtually independence, with France as elder brother, guide and monitor. He had no precedents to guide him, but he knew what he wanted when remonstrated with as to where was the place of France in such a government. He replied, quote, the French government will send commissioners to speak with him. Absolute local independence on the one hand, but on the other, French capital and French administrators, helping to develop and educate the country, and high officials from France, as a link between both governments. The local power was too well safeguarded for us to call the scheme a protractorate in a political content of that dishonest word. All the evidence shows that the Sant worked alone had reached forward to that form of political allegiance, which we know today as dominion status. Firm as was his grasp of reality, old Toussaint looked beyond San Domingo with a boldness of imagination surpassed by no contemporary. In the Constitution, he authorized the slave trade because the island needed people to cultivate it. When the Africans landed, however, they would be free men. Ooh, so they're freeing them. Okay. But while loaded in the cares of the government, he cherished a project of sailing to Africa with armed ammunition and 1,000 of his best soldiers, and were conquering vast tracts of country, putting an end to the slave trade and making millions of black people free and French, quote unquote, as his constitution had made black people of San Domingo. It was no dream. He had sent millions of francs to America to wait for the day when he would be ready. He was already 55. The spirit was it that moved him. What spirit was it that moved him? Ideas do not fall from heaven. The great revolution was propelled him out of his humble joys and obscure destiny, and the trumpets of its heroic period rang ever in his ear. In him, born a slave, the leader of slaves, the concrete realization of liberty, equality, and fraternity was the womb of ideas and the spring of power which overflowed with narrow environment and embraced the whole of the world. And I have to do another repeal. There we go. Who's in here? Damn it, wrong button. No one is. Okay.
I'm here.
No, there was a thing. But for the revolution, this extraordinary man and his band of gifted associates would have lived their lives as slaves, serving the commonplace creatures who owned them, standing barefooted and in rags, to which inflated little governors and mediocre officials from Europe passed by.
Mediocre.
Why didn't you what?
Mediocre.
Thank you. As many a talented African stands in Africa today. Too much importance had been attached to the Constitution. It was merely a formal embodiment of the position to which Toussaint had been moving steadily since his expulsion of Hoondeville. His method of publishing it was his usual one of mystery. He summoned his white and biracial assembly to prepare the document. He then left them to it and set off to capture Spanish San Domingo. On his return, the Constitution was ready. Nobody knew its contents except himself and assembly. He suddenly told Vincent that he would allow him to leave for France if he would take the Constitution to Bonaparte. Vincent agreed because there seemed no chance of getting away otherwise. Toussaint told him to go to Genovese and bid Madame Louverture goodbye, Vincent being very friendly with the family. As soon as Vincent left, Toussaint published the Constitution in July 1801. There was a religious ceremony, a great banquet, an illumination of public rejoicing. Toussaint's Constitution was a despotism, and the biracial people and the free black people did not like it. But what cared those thousands who sang and danced? When Vincent returned, he went to Toussaint and reproached him for publishing so far-reaching a document without the sanction of the French government And when he saw the details, he was horrified. He consulted Pascal, and both agreed that Toussaint ought to withdraw it. They might as well have asked the island of San Domingo to withdraw itself from the Caribbean Sea and attach itself to France. Toussaint listened very patiently. There is no room in it for any officials from France, said Vincent. France will send commissioners to speak with me, said Toussaint. What is really required is that France send you charges d'affaires and ambassadors, as the Americans and the Spaniards will certainly do, and even the British. This was a crude innuendo. Even Vincent at times suspected Toussaint. How difficult it was for them to understand that Toussaint was using the British and playing the diplomatic game with them by detested these bulwarks of European reaction just as much as any other true sons of revolution. Quote, I know that the English government is the most dangerous for me and the most perfidious for France. It did all it could to get the sole right of trade with the island, but I gave it only what I could not help giving. I needed it. Why doesn't Bonaparte write me? He asked Vincent. He writes to the King of England. Pascal, until this time, another devoted follower, also disapproved of the Constitution, and Toussaint dropped him. Vincent complained to Mosey and Christophe. They also condemned it. Christophe said Toussaint had gone too far, and Mosey called Toussaint an old fool. He thinks he is a king of San Domingo. The printing of the Constitution particularly startled Vincent. To have it had it printed meant, in those days, that an irrevocable decision had been taken. Toussaint agreed. It would have cost him nothing to send a written copy, but he was going his way. There was one last painful interview between the two men. Vincent did all he could to make Toussaint reconsider his action. All black people were free. He could not withdraw the right of governing the island from France. Quote, give me a list of your comrades in arms who have contributed most to driving out the English and restoring cultivation. The government, I am certain, will prove to them this gratitude. End quote. Toussaint, usually calm, was violently agitated. He replied that he would see that infinite pleasure some of his comrades rewarded. But when Vincent asked him what he wanted for himself, he replied sharply that he wanted nothing, that he knew his destruction was the ultimate aim, that his children would never enjoy the life that he had amassed, but that he was not yet the victim of his enemies. To this personal outburst, he added some reflection, which so hurt the conscience of the sensitivity Vincent that he would not even write them down. But we can guess what they were. Bitterness at the insult and neglect which he felt were caused by his color, an impossible position in which he and his people were placed. Submission, which would mean the restoration of slavery, or defiance, which would mean war and a complete devastation of the island, his isolation, white and black friends against him. All these must have wrung the words out of him, who ordinarily never spoke but when he thought it was necessary, and then said only that what he wanted to say. He turned abruptly from Vincent and invaded about 100 persons who were awaiting for him. He sprang on his horse and rode away so quickly that even his guards was taken by surprise. For these few weeks, Vincent seemed to have doubted Toussaint. Vincent was a white man. He could never dread slavery as a black man, could never have that unsleeping fear of white treachery so strong in the generations of San Domingo black people. Honest himself, Vincent took it for granted that the rulers of France would act with common decency. towards those black men whose service to France he had witnessed. To him, it seemed that Toussaint was merely pursuing a personal ambition. Before he left, he sounded Christophe. Would he leave Le Camp, where he commanded, and go to Saint Ilgo to welcome the French expedition, which would certainly come? It would save a great deal of trouble. Christophe, invasive, said he would do his best for peace. With his equivocal answer, Vincent had to be satisfied. He did not know what to do. He went home via America, and from Philadelphia he wrote to Toussaint, warning him against projects of independence. Vincent did all that a man can do, even in trying to detach Christophe from Toussaint. He was acting as he thought, in the best interests of France and San Domingo. To him, the restoration of slavery was unthinkable. He expected it expected it as little as millions of British people expected the intrigues of Baldwin, Horace, Eden with Lavelle and Mussolini after the denial of arms of the Abyssinian, and the grandiose promises of fidelity to the League of Nations and the ideal of collective security. Many of honest subordinates was in this way been the unwilling instrument of the inevitable treachery up above. The trouble is that when faced with the brutal reality, he goes in the end with his own side, and by the very confidence which his integrity creates does indefinitely more harm than the open enemy. All right, that's the end of that chapter. Looks like Toussaint is kind of being different and weird. I don't like the fact that he didn't bring in the laborers. It's just very, very yeah. I don't like that part. Let's find out. All right. Chapter 7. Wait, no. 10, 11. This is 12, isn't it? Yeah, 12. Wait, yeah, 12. The bourgeoisie prepares to restore slavery. Ooh, here we go. How are we doing? We're doing good. Okay. Toussaint was perfectly right in his suspicion. What is the regime under which the colonies have most prospered? Again, asked Bonaparte. And on being told the ancient regime, he decided to restore it. Slavery and biracial discrimination. Bonaparte hated black people. Of course he did. The revolution had appointed that brave and brilliant biracial General Dumas, commander-in-chief of one of its armies. But Bonaparte detested him for his color and persecuted him. Yet Bonaparte was not a colonist, and his anti-black bias was far from influencing his major policies. He wanted profit for his supporters, and the clamorous colonists found in him a ready ear. The bourgeoisie of the maritime towns wanted the fabulous profits of the old days. The passionate desire to free all humanity, which had called for black people's freedom in the great days of the revolution, now huddled in the slums of Paris and Marseilles, exhausted by its great efforts and terrorized by Bonaparte's bayonets and Franchi's police. But the abolition of slavery was one of the proudest memories of the revolution, and much more important, the San Domingo black people had an army and leaders trained to fight in European manner. These were no S-word tradesmen with spears tribesmen with spear against whom European soldiers armed with rifles could win undying glory. Occupied with his European campaigns, Bonaparte never lost sight of San Domingo, as he never lost sight of anything. His officer presented plans after plan, but the British fleet and unknown strength of black people prevented action. Yet, early in March 1801, a shift in his policy nearly compelled him to leave Toussaint in complete charge of San Domingo. French and British bourgeoisie were in the middle of that struggle for world supremacy, which lasted over 20 years and devastated Europe. Bonaparte's aim at India, and having missed his first spring by way of Egypt, he won over the Tsar Paul, and these two arranged to march overland and steal from the British that these had stolen from the indigenous. Bonaparte I think it's people from India, I'm sorry. Bonaparte could not fight in two hemispheres at once, and on March 4th, he had wrote a letter to Toussaint, a letter beaming with goodwill. He had been busy, but now that peace was near, he had had time to read Toussaint's letters. He would appoint him captain general of the island. He asked Toussaint to develop agriculture and build up an armed forces. Quote, "The time, I hope, will not be far when the division from San Domingo will be able to contribute in your parts of the world to the glory and the possessions of the Republic." But the British bourgeoisie, driven out of America, now fully realized the importance of India. Pitt, in collusion with Paul's son Alexander, organized a murder of a pro-French Paul. 7 days after the letter to Toussaint was written, Paul was strangled, and on the following day, the British fleet sailed to the Baltic. And Bonaparte he knew at once that Pitt had beaten him, and the Indian from India raid was off. The letter and instruction to Toussaint were never sent, and Bonaparte prepared to destroy Toussaint. It is Toussaint's supreme merit that while he saw European civilization as a valuable and necessary thing, and strove it to lay its foundation among his people, he never had the illusion that it conferred any moral superiority. He knew French, British, and Spanish imperialists for the insatiable gangsters that they were, that there is no oath to scared from them a break, no crime, deception, treachery, cruelty, destruction of human life and property, which they could not commit against those who could not defend themselves. When Vincent arrived in Paris, preparations were well underway, but the Constitution gave Bonaparte a convenient excuse. Poor Vincent had attempted to persuade Toussaint to give way to Bonaparte by condemning the Constitution as treason. Now he tried to persuade Bonaparte to give way to Toussaint by denying that the Constitution was treason. Bonaparte accused Toussaint of being sold to the British. Stoutly, Vincent defended him. Bonaparte swore that Vincent cursed the glided Africans, quote unquote. Gilded, yeah. Said that you need to speak louder sometimes. Said that because I couldn't hear you. You said it so quickly and so I kind of got it. Said that he would not leave an epaulette. I got it right. Epaulette on the shoulders, not soldiers, shoulders of a single black person. They used the N-word in the colony. Vincent put it to him that Britain might assist Toussaint. Bonaparte boasted that Britain had shown some inclination to oppose the expedition, but when he threatened to clothe Toussaint with ultimate power and acknowledge his independence, the British had kept silent. Bonaparte thought that they dreaded the effect of independent San Domingo on their own slave colony of Jamaica. But Pitt, Dundas, and Maitland were laughing in their sleeves and rubbing their hands in anticipation. Vincent tried to point out the dangers of the expedition. Bonaparte called Toussaint a, quote, revolted slave, end quote, called Vincent a coward and drove him from his presence. Vincent was appalled at Bonaparte's violence. If this was the spirit in which the French were going to San Domingo, they were heading for a fall. As anxious now for France as for San Domingo, he took the bold step and addressed the memoirs to the minister. in which he tried to paint the strength of the colony and the extraordinary genius of the man who ruled there. Quote, at the head of so many resources is a man of most active and tireless, of whom one can possibly have any idea. It is the strictest truth to say that he is everywhere and above all, that in that spot where the sound judgment and danger make it essential for him to be. This great sobriety, the faculty according to him alone of never taking a rest, the advantage he enjoys of being able to start at once with the work in his office after wearing some journeys, of replying to hundreds letters a day and tiring out his secretaries. More than that, the art of tantalizing and confusing everybody, even to deceit. All this makes him a man so superior to all around him that respect and submission reach the limits of fanaticism. Thank you. In the vast number of heads he has imposed on his brother in San Domingo, a power without bounds. He is an absolute master of the island, and nothing can counteract his wishes. Whatever they may be, although some distinguished men, but very few black people among them, know what are his plans and view them with great fear. End quote. Vincent described Toussaint as superior to everyone in San Domingo, but if one reads the extract again, it becomes clear that this brave, honest, intelligent, and experienced officer was obviously describing the most extraordinary human being he had ever met in his life, with powers beyond what he thought possible. In the writing of contemporaries describing the great figures of French Revolution, the Napoleonic I can't say it, era, one finds his note of astonishment. This, quote, I can't believe my own eyes attitude in writing about only three men, Bonaparte, Nelson, the sailor of Toussaint, and Toussaint. Bonaparte was so angry that he banished Vincent to the island of Elba. Personally loved and respected by all his contemporaries, Vincent and Beauvais failed as will fail all to do not understand that in a revolution each must choose his side and stick to it. But though Bonaparte might shout the N-word with the ER in the best slave-owning manner, more than anyone in France, he divided the difficulties. At first, he had thought it easy. The colonists who had fled in the early days of the revolution thought of the slaves as a motley crowd of black brigades who would fly at the first sight of a white man. He could such cowed and trembling inwards ever be anything else? They had defeated the British. Nonsense. That was fever. General Mickle of the First Commission, who had not seen Toussaint's army in action, called his officers a collection of conceited incompetents. But Ramon, Pascal, and Vincent, all whom liked black people and therefore knew that they were capable of war against any expedition. Pascal said that the more enlightened of black people, i.e. those who had been freed before the revolution, did not love Toussaint, but 49/15 of the population followed him blindly, regarding him as being inspired by God. Ramon's attitude was most astonishing. Ramon was not even a Frenchman, but a Creole from Tobago. Yet, despite his rough treatment at the hands of Toussaint, he still retained his belief in Toussaint's devotion to France. He wrote that Toussaint had acted irregularly because of his fear of slavery. Let Bonaparte clothe him with full civil and military power and reassure him about the future. At the end of the war, he would hand back the colony. Maleficent, an old colonist who was now an official in San Domingo, was offered a post in the expedition. He drafted a memorandum full of praise for Toussaint and the laborers and warned Bonaparte against the catastrophe he was preparing. When he met Leclerc, a captain general, a few days before the fleet sailed, Leclerc accused him of cowardice. Quote, all the N-words, when they only too happy that we pardoned them, end quote. You are misinformed, General, quote unquote. But there is a colonist who has offered to arrest Toussaint in the interior of the country with 60 grenadiers, end quote. There's more quotes. These are all quotes. He is bolder than I, for I would not attempt it with 60,000. He is very rich, Toussaint. He has more than 40 millions. Patiently, Maleficent pointed out to him that it was impossible for Toussaint to have this sum. Maleficent shared Romoni's opinion of Toussaint. He said afterwards that if Bonaparte had sent Lavax to San Domingo with 3,000 men, all would have been well. Toussaint was an eminently reasonable man, and he and Lavac would have worked out a modus vivendi, whereby French capital would have had full opportunity in the island. It was not to be. Leclerc pooh-poohed Maleficent's remonstrance and dismissed him. Remonstrances. Huh. We'll look at that word real quick.
Remonstrances.
Say, you gotta start all over.
Remonstrances.
Okay, thank you. Bonaparte. How are we doing? Is everybody okay? Who's in here? I don't know if we have enough gifts. We only have 3 people in here. Okay. Bonaparte. Yeah, there's only 3 of us in here. Bonaparte never had any such foolish ideas. Vincent had told him of the strength of Toussaint's army, with its soldiers and officers tried and experienced by 10 years of constant fighting. The great soldiers added more and more men to the force. So as to avoid too much talk, he distributed his preparations in every harbor in France, Holland, and Belgium. The preliminaries of peace were signed in October 1st, 1801. 8 days after, Bonaparte gave the word, and even the delay of adversary winds held up the expedition only until December 14th. It was the largest expedition that had ever sailed from France, consisting of 20,000 That had commanded the advance guard of Dexo, whose last minute attacked had saved Bonaparte from the disastrous defeat of the Marengo. Boyer had saved Bonaparte from the disastrous defeat of the Marengo. Boyer had commanded the mobile guards, whose last-minute attack had saved Bonaparte from the disastrous defeat of the Marengo. Boyer had commanded the mobile guards, which patrolled Upper Egypt. Humbert had commanded the expedition against Ireland. They were men who had experience of guerrilla warfare in Lavendi. General Pamphile de la Croix, who sailed with the expedition and wrote a valuable history of the campaign and the San Domingo Revolution, has left us his opinion. Quote, the army of Leclerc was composed of an infinite number of soldiers, with great talent, good strategists, great tacticians, officers of engineers and artillery, well educated and very resourceful. At last moment, Bonaparte changed the command, putting his brother-in-law Leclerc at the head and sign of the importance his attachment to the venture. Pauline, Leclerc's wife, and their son went with the expedition. She carried magicians, artists, and all the paraphernalia of a court. Slavery would be reestablished, civilization restarted, and a good time would be had by all. And in these last crucial months, Toussaint, fully aware of Bonaparte's preparation, was busy sawing off the branch on which he sat. In the north, around Plaisance, Lemby, Dundon, the vanguard of the revolution was not satisfied with the new regime. Toussaint's discipline was hard, but it was infinitely better than the old slavery. What these old revolutionary black people objected to was working for their white masters. Mosey was a commandant of the North Province. Mosey sympathized with black people. Work, yes, but not for whites. Quote, whatever my old uncle may do, I cannot bring myself to the executioner of my color. It is always in the interest of the metropoles that he scolds me, but these interests are those of the whites, and I shall only love them when they have given me back the eye that they made me lose in battle. Gone were the days when Toussaint would leave the front and ride through the night to inquire into the grievance of the laborers, and though protected, the whites make the laborers see that he was their leader. Revolutionaries through and through, those bold men, own brothers of the Cordeliers of Paris and the Vomborg workers of Petrograd, organized another insurrection. Their aim was to massacre the whites, overthrow Toussaint's government, and some hope to put Mosey in his place. Every observer, and Toussaint himself, thought that the laborers were following him because of his past services and his unquestioned superiority. This insurrection proved that they were following him because he represented the complete emancipation for their former degradation, which was their chief goal. As soon as they saw that he was no longer going to this end, they were ready to throw him over. This was no mere riot of a few discontent or tireless black people. It was widespread over the north. The revolutionaries chose a time when Toussaint was away at Petit Riviere, attending the wedding of Dessalines. The movement should have begun in Le Cap on September 21st, but Christophe heard it was just in time to check the first outburst of various quarters in the town. On the 22nd and 23rd, the revolt burst in the revolutionary districts of Marmalade. Yeah, thank you. Plaisance, Lemby, Port Margat, and Dondon, home of the famous regiment of the Sans-Culottes. On the morning of the 23rd, it broke out again in Le Camp, while armed bands killed all the whites whom they met on the way, appeared in the suburbs to make contact with those in the town. While Christophe defeated these, Toussaint and Dessalines marched against the rising of Marably and Dondon, and it fell to pieces before him. And he tried, and his terrible lieutenant Mosey, avoiding a meeting with Toussaint, attacked and defeated another band. But black people in certain districts had revolted to cry of long live Mosey. Toussaint, therefore, had him arrested and would not allow the military tribunal even to hear him. The documents, he said, were enough. I flatter myself that the commissioners would not delay a judgment so necessary to the tranquility of the colony. He was afraid that Mosey might supplant him. Upon this hint, the commission gave judgment, and Mosey was shot. He died as he had lived. He stood before the place of execution in the presence of the troops of the garrison, and in a firm voice gave the word to firing squad, fire, my friends, fire. What exactly did Mosey stand for? We shall never know. 40 years after his death, Modi and the Haitian historian gave an outline of Mosey's program, whose authenticity, however, has been yes, however, has been questioned. Toussaint refused to break up the large estates. Mosey wanted small grants of land for junior officers and even the rank and file. Toussaint favored the whites against the biracial people. Mosey sought to build an alliance between black people and biracial peoples against the French. It was certain that he had a strong sympathy for the laborers and hated the old slave owners, but he was not anti-white. He bitterly regretted the indignities of which he had been forced to submit. Ramoni and we know how highly he esteemed Sonothax. We have very little to go on, but he seems to have been singularly attractive and possibly profound person. The old slave owners hated him, and they pressed Toussaint to get rid of him. Christophe, too, was jealous of Mosey, and Christophe loved white society. Guilty or not guilty of treason, Mosey had too many enemies to escape the implications of a long-lived Mosey, shouted by the revolutionaries. Two black people of the North, already angry at Toussaint's policy, the execution of Mosey was the final disillusionment. They could not understand it, as was and is inevitable that they thought in terms of color. After Toussaint himself, Mosey, his nephew, symbolized the revolution. He it was who had led the labors against Hundeville. He also had led the insurrection, which exhorted the authority of Romani to take over Spanish San Domingo. Oh my gosh, another appeal. Not too much this time. San Domingo in an insurrection, which to the laborers had been for the purpose of stopping the Spanish traffic in slaves. Mosey had arrested Romy and later Vincent, and now Toussaint had shot him for taking the part of black people against the whites. Toussaint recognized his error. If the break with the French, and Vincent had shaken him from his usual calm in their last interview, it was nothing to the remorse which moved him after the execution of Mosey. None who knew him had ever seen him so agitated. He tried to explain it away in a long proclamation. Mosey was the soul of the insurrection. Mosey was a young man of loose habits. It was useless. Mosey had stood too high in his council for too long. But so set was Toussaint that he could only think of further repression. Why should black people support Mosey against him? That question he did not stop to ask, or if he did, failed to appreciate the answer. In the districts of the insurrection, he shot without mercy. He lined up the laborers and spoke to them in turn. On the basis of a stumbling answer and uncertainty, decided who should be shot. Cowed by his power, they submitted. He published a series of laws suppressing the severity, anything that he had yet decreed. He introduced a rigid passport system for all classes of the population. He confined the laborers to their plantation more strictly than ever, and he made the managers of foremen responsible for this law under pain and imprisonment. Anyone fomenting disorder could be condemned to 6 months, hard labor with weight attached to his feet by a chain. He prohibited the soldiers from visiting the plantation except to see their fathers or mothers, and then only for a limited period. He was now afraid of the contact between the Revolutionary Army and the people, and an infallible sign of revolutionary disintegration. And while he broke the morale of the black masses, he labored to reassure the whites. Some of them rejoiced openly at the rumors of the expedition, and Toussaint, instead of treating them as he had treated the laborers, merely deported them. There were others. We need no doubt who holds the same views. Thought is wiser to keep their mouth shut. A substantial number, however, accepted the new order, and viewed with dismay the violence and destruction which they knew were inevitable if a French expedition came. Some began to leave and asked for passports. One of the most notable Creoles in San Domingo, a man of good education and judgment, who fully accepted the new San Domingo, came to Toussaint and asked him for a passport. Here was what Toussaint dreaded: the breakup of the unstable regime before it had a chance to acquire cohesion. He went quickly to the door to see that he was not likely to be overheard, a characteristic action. When coming back, he looked Del Negrugi full in the face and asked him, "Why do you want to go away, you whom I esteem and love?" "Because I am white, and notwithstanding the kindly feelings you have for me, I see what you are about to become, an irritated chief of black people." With some justice, he accused Toussaint of deporting those whites who had rejoiced at coming of the expedition. Toussaint justified his action with warmth. "They have had an imprudence, and fully to rejoice at such news, as if the expedition was not destined to destroy me, to destroy the whites, to destroy the colony." With a mind such as his, essentially creative and orderly, this was the prospect which preoccupied him and warped his judgment. Quote, "In France, I am represented as an independent power, and therefore they are arming against me, who refused General Maitland's offer to establish my independence under the protection of England, and who always rejected the proposal which Sonothax made to me on the subject. He knew that the expedition was on its way, but still he hoped that somehow the coming catastrophe might be averted. Quote, however, you wish to set out for France, I consent, but at least let your voyage be useful to the colony. I will send letters to the first consul by you, and will entreat him to listen to you. Tell him about me. Tell him how prosperous agriculture is, how prosperous is commerce. In a word, tell him what I have done. It is according to all I have done here that I ought and that I wish to be judged." Real quick, I'm gonna look ahead. Remember 279. 279. Holy crap, it's too far. Yeah. 279. Oh no, hold on. What's 279? Oh yeah. 79. Yeah, it's 79. It's too much. 286. 79. It's like 186. Okay, where was I at? 20 times I have written.
If you want to finish it, like, I'm not in a hurry.
Okay.
And Lynn's not in a hurry. So, like, take your time.
20 times I have written to Bonaparte to ask him to send civil commissioners, to tell him to dispatch hither the old colonists, whites instructed to administering public affairs, good machinists, good workmen. He has never replied. Suddenly he avails himself of the peace of which he has not designed to inform me and of which I have learned only through the English, in order to direct against me a formidable expedition, in the ranks of which I see my personal enemies and people injurious to the colony whom I sent away. Come to me within 24 hours. I want, oh, how I want you and my letters to arrive in time to make the first consul change his determination, to make him see that in ruining me, he ruins black people, ruins not only San Domingo, but all the Western colonies. If Bonaparte is the first man in France, Toussaint is the first man in the archipelago of the Antilles. He had no false modesty as to what he meant in San Domingo. He reflected for a moment, then said in a firm tone that he had been making arrangements with the English to set up 20,000 black people from Africa, but not for treachery, to make them soldiers of France. Quote, I know the perfidy of the English. I am under no obligation to them for the information they gave me as to the expedition coming to San Domingo. No, I never will. I armed for them. But reality forced itself on him again. Quote, I took up arms for freedom of my color, which France alone proclaimed, but which she has no right to nullify. Our liberty is no longer in her hands. It is in our own. We will defend it or perish. This strange duality, so confused to his people who had to do the fighting, continued to the very end. And yet, in this moment of his greatest uncertainty, so different from his usual clarity of mind and vigor of action, Toussaint showed himself one of those few men for whom power is a means to an end, the development of civilization, the betterment of his fellow creatures. He, oh my gosh, another appeal. Okay, where was I at? Showed himself one of those few men of power. Okay, and developed a civilization to better life. His very hesitation were a sign of superior cast of his mind. Dessalines and Mosey would not have hesitated. He issued another proclamation and devoted most of it to reassuring the white proprietors, who, quote, will always find us adherent protectors, true friends, zealous defenders. What did all this mean to the former slaves? When he touched the expedition, the confusion of his mind was evident in every line. Quote, men of good faith will not be able no longer to believe that France, who abandoned San Domingo to herself at a time when her enemies disputed possession, will now send there an army to destroy the men who have not ceased to serve her will. After thus sowing doubt in the minds of the people as to the intentions of the French, he continued, but if it is so that this crime of which the French government is suspected is real, it suffices for me to say that a child who knows the right that nature has given over it to the author of its days shows itself obedient and submissive towards its father and mother. And if, in spite of its submission, the obedience, the father and mother are unnatural enough to wish to destroy it, there remains no other course than to place its vengeance in the hands of God. So God was to defend black people from slavery. What of the army and the people and himself, their leader? Brave soldiers, general, officers, rank and file, do not listen to the wicked. I shall show you the road you ought to follow. I am a soldier. I am afraid of no man, and I fear only God. If I must die, it shall be as a soldier of honor, and with no fear of reproach. Toussaint could not believe that the French ruling class would be so deprived, so lost to all sense of decency, as to try to restore slavery. His grasp of politics led him to make all preparations, but he could not admit to himself and to his people that it was easier to find decency, gratitude, justice, humanity in the cage of starving tigers than in the council of imperialism. Whether in the cabinets of Pitt or Bonaparte, Baldwin, Laval, or Blum.
That's a good stopping point. I didn't know that there was one.
I have like, you just told me that we had enough time. I was going to finish.
I just thought, I thought there was.
I'm going with the first. Going with the first. Okay. Criticism is not enough. What should Toussaint have done? 150 years of history and the scientific study of revolution began by Marx, Engels, and exemplified by Lenin and Trotsky justify just in pointing to the alternative course. Lenin and the Bolsheviks after the October Revolution faced much more same problems as Toussaint. Russian bourgeoisie culture was a relatively poor thing, but Lenin meant frankly that it was superior to that of the proletariat and would have to be used until the proletariat had developed itself. He rigidly excluded the bourgeoisie from political power, but he proposed that they should be given important posts and good salaries, higher than those of Communist Party members. Even some communists who had suffered and fought under Tsarism were after a time dismissed and replaced by competent bourgeoisie. He can measure Toussaint's gigantic intellect by the fact that, untrained as he was, he attempted to do the same. His black army and generals filled the political role of the Bolshevik Party. If he kept whites in his army, it was for the same reason that the Bolsheviks kept Tsar's officers. Neither revolution had enough training and educated officers of its own, and the Black Jacobins, relatively speaking, were far worse off culturally than the Russian Bolshevik. The whole theory of Bolshevik policy was that the victories of the new regime would gradually win over those who had been constrained to accept it by force. Toussaint hoped for the same. If he failed, it was for the same reason that Russian socialist revolution failed. Even after all its achievements, the defeat of the revolution in Europe. Had the Black Jacobins been able to consolidate the Democratic Republic in 1794, Haiti would have remained a French colony, but an attempt to restore slavery would have been most unlikely. It was in method and not in principle that Toussaint failed. The race question is subsidiary to the class question in politics, and to think of imperialism in terms of race is disastrous. But not neglect the racial factors as merely incidental, as an error only less grave than to make the fundamental. There were Jacobin workmen in Paris who would have fought for black people against Bonaparte's troops, but the international movement was not then what it is today, and there were none in San Domingo. The black laborers saw only the old slave owning whites. These would accept the new regime, but never to the extent of fighting for it against a French army. And the masses knew it. Toussaint, of course, knew this also. He never trusted Age, his chief of staff, who was a Frenchman, and asked Age's junior Latimer Ternese to keep an eye on him. But whereas Lenin kept the party and the masses thoroughly aware of every step and explained carefully the exact position of the bourgeois servants of the worker state, Toussaint explained nothing and allowed the masses to think that their old enemies were being favored at their expense. In allowing himself to be looked upon as taking the side of the whites against black people, Toussaint committed to unpardonable crime in the eyes of the community where the whites stood for so much evil. That they should get back their property was bad enough. That they should be privileged was intolerable. And and to shoot Mosey, the black person, for the sake of the whites was more than an error. It was a crime. It was almost as if Lenin had Trotsky shot for taking the side of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. But Toussaint's position was extraordinarily difficult. San Domingo was, after all, a French colony. Granted that before the expedition was a certainty, plain speech was impossible. Once he understood that it was coming, there should have been no hesitation. He should have declared that the powerful expedition could have no other aim than the restoration of slavery, summoned the population to resist, declare independence, confiscated the property of all who refused to accept the distribute it among his supporters. Age and the other white officers should have been given a plain choice, except or the black officers would have been on guard against them. The men would have known where they stood and would have shot them at the slightest vacillation before the enemy. The whites should have been offered the same choice, except the black regime, which was guaranteed and will guarantee your property. Our leaves traitors in wartime would be dealt with as all traitors in war. Many of the planters favored independence. They would have stayed and contributed their knowledge, such as it was to the new state. Not only former slaves had followed Toussaint. Lamartiniere was a biracial person, so white that only those who knew his origins could tell that he had black ancestry. But he was absolutely and completely devoted to the cause of Toussaint. So was Marapaz, an old free black person. With Dessalines, Belair, Mosey, and the 100 of other officers, enslaved and formerly free, it would have been easy for Toussaint to get the mass of the population behind him. Having the army, some of the better educated black people and biracial people, and the laborers who had supported him so staunchly in everything, he would have been invincible. With the issue unobscured and his power clear, many who might otherwise have hesitated would have come down on the side that was taking decisive action. With decisive victory won, it was not impossible to reopen negotiations with the chastened French government to establish the hope for relations. It was the ex-slave laborers, the ex-slave army, which would decide the issue, and Toussaint's policy crippled both. He left the army with a divided allegiance. There were Frenchmen in it whose duty would be to fight for France. They, the biracial people and the old free black people, had no fears about their liberty. Instead of bringing the black laborers near, he drove them away from him. Even after the revolt, it was too late. Lenin crushed the Kronstadt revolt with a relentless hand, but in the manner so absurd as to call forth protest from sticklers for party discipline. He purposed the new economic policy immediately afterwards. It was this quick recognition of danger that saved the Russian Revolution. Toussaint crushed the revolt, as he was bound to do. But instead of recognizing the origins of the revolt as springing from the fear of the same enemy that he was arming against, he was sterner with the revolutionaries than he had ever been before. It happened that the day of which Mosey was executed, November 21st, was the very day fixed by the Bonaparte for the departure of the expedition. Instead of reprisal, Toussaint would have covered the country, and in the homely way that he understood so well, mobilized the masses, talked to the people, explained the situation to them, and told them what he wanted them to do. As it was the policy, he persisted to reduce the masses to a state of stupor. It has been said that he was thinking of the effect in France. his severity and his proclamation, assuring the whites, aimed at showing Bonaparte that all classes were safe in San Domingo, and that he could be trusted to govern the colony with justice. It is probably true that, and is his greatest condemnation. Bonaparte was not going to be convinced by Toussaint's justice and fairness and the capacity to govern. Where imperialists do not find disorder, they create it deliberately, as Hondeville did. They want an excuse for going in, but they can find that easily and will go in even without any. It is force that counts, and chiefly an organized force of the masses, always but particularly at the moment of struggle. A leader must think of his own masses. It is what they think that matters, not what the imperialists think. And if to make matters clear to them, Toussaint had to condone a massacre of the whites, so much the worse of the whites. He had done everything possible for them. And if the race question occupied the place that it did in San Domingo, it was not the fault of black people. But Toussaint, like Rosenspire, destroyed his own left wing, and with it sealed his own doom. The tragedy was that there was no need for it. Rosenspire struck at the masses because he was bourgeoisie, and they were communist. What clash was inevitable, and regrets over it are vain. But between Toussaint and his people, there was no fundamental difference of outlook or aim. Knowing the race question for the political and social question that it was, he tried to deal with it in a purely political and social way. It was a grave era. Lenin, in his thesis of the Second Congress of the Communist International, warned that white revolutionaries, warning they badly needed, that such has been the effect of the policy of imperialism, of the relationship between advanced and backwards people, that European communists will have to make wide concessions to natives of colonial countries in order to overcome the justified prejudice which these feel towards all classes in the oppressing countries. Toussaint, as his power grew, forgot that. He ignored black laborers, bewildered them at every moment that he needed them most. And to bewilder the masses is to strike to the deadliest of all the blows at the revolution. Hold on, let's see what page we're on. Almost 2 more pages. His personal weakness, the adverse sides of his strength, played its part also. He left even his generals in the dark. A naturally silent and reserved man, he had been formed by military discipline. He gave orders and expected them to be obeyed. Nobody ever knew what he was doing. He said suddenly that Sonothax must go and invite his generals to sign a letter or not, as they pleased. When Vincent spoke of Christophe and Mosey about the Constitution, they knew nothing about it. Mosey better complaint about Toussaint and the whites came obviously from a man to whom Toussaint had never explained the motives of his policy. They would not have needed much persuasion to follow a bold lead. Mosey was feeling his way towards it, and he can point out Toussaint's weakness all the more clear because Dessalines had actually found the correct method. His speech to the army was famous. Another version, he probably made it more than once, ran this way: if France wishes to try any nonsense here, everybody must rise together, men and women. Loud acclamations greeted this bold pronouncement. What is together? Men and women. Loud acclamations greeted this bold pronouncement. What?
I said yes.
Okay. Worthy of thousands of Toussaint's equivocal proclamations assuring the whites Dessalines had not the slightest desire to reinsure whites. The whites were whites of the old regime. Dessalines did not care what they said or thought. The black laborers had to do the fighting, and it was they who needed reassurance. It was not that Toussaint had any illusions about the whites. He had none whatever. When the war had actually begun, he sent a curt message to his commanders: leave nothing white behind you. But the mischief had been done. Yet Toussaint's error sprang from the very qualities that made him what he was. It is easy to see today, as his generals saw after he was dead, where he had erred. It does not mean that they or any of us would have done better in his place. If Dessalines could see so clearly simply, it was because the ties that bound this uneducated soldier to French civilization were of the slenderest. He saw what was under his nose so well because he saw no further. Toussaint's failure was a failure of enlightenment, not of darkness. In the last days of December, the fleet of Admiral Lavarty Josias bearing in the last days of December, the fleet of Admiral Lavarty Josias bearing on board. In the last days of December, the fleet of Admiral Lavarty Josias bearing on board the first detachment of 12,000 men sailed into the harbor of Samian Bay. Toussaint, standing alone on the neighboring peak, watched the vessel. Unaccustomed to the harbor of Samian Bay, Toussaint, standing alone on the neighboring peak, watched the vessel. Unaccustomed to naval armaments, he was overwhelmed by their numbers. As he returned to his staff, he uttered the words, "We shall perish. All France is coming to overwhelm us." It was not fear. He was never afraid, but certain traits of character run deep in great men. Despite all that he had done, he was at bottom the same. Toussaint, who had hesitated to join the revolution in 1791, had for 1 whole month had protected his master's plantation from destruction. Only this time, it was not a plantation, a few scores slaves, but a colony of hundreds of thousands of people. And that's the end of that chapter. And we'll start the War of Independence, chapter 18. That's a good critique of Toussaint. I was having that same thing. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? It was a good critique. Good critique. We'll find out what more critiques are going to happen as they're coming in. Why are you doing that? It was a good critique. Good critique. We'll find out what more critiques are going to happen as they're coming in to take over the colony. Let's see what happens with Dessalines and see what happens to Toussaint. Yeah, I would say Toussaint betrayed. Hey, no worries. I understand. Okay. No problems. We'll talk about rescheduling. No worries. No worries. I understand. Does anybody have anything to say?
I really enjoyed this chapter as we're getting set up for the French to come in and do their thing. And we're going to see how Toussaint handles this. Although he is prepared for the French to betray him and has been prepared the whole time for the French to betray him. There's a statue of, I can't remember her name, Mrs. Napoleon, in Haiti that they spray paint and desecrate all the time. I think it's awesome.
So betraying the masses, though, as you can see through the critique, he's betraying the black laborers because we all know in the racial hierarchy, black people are below biracial people and definitely below white people. So he's betraying the black masses a bit by holding on to some of the ideas, you know what I mean, by the bourgeois, by the French culture. So he is betraying. I feel like he's betraying himself by holding on to those things. if I was, I don't know, I would like to say this, if I was in his shoes, it would have been better if he just betrayed all of the French stuff. You know what I mean? So, but I am not in his position. I wasn't there. I can only look at an outside source. So, anyways, all right, everybody. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Everybody have a good night.